Bonsoir tout le monde. Merci d'être avec nous pour l'ouverture de la couverture des témoins. Je m'appelle Julie Guinard et je suis directrice des expositions par l'intérim au Musée canadien d'histoire. We're privileged to be gathered today on the traditional unceded
territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe. It is an honor to welcome Elder Claudette Commanda of the Kitigan-Zibi Anishinaabe First Nation. I would like to invite Elder Commanda to the stage to offer a word of welcome and prayer.
Hello, everyone. Bonjour. Hey, It's a pleasure and an honor to be here to bring forth words of welcome as well as a blessing. And it's a little bit intimidating standing up here right now and I see no one. But I know you're all there. I'm very honored to bring forth words of welcome for our relatives who come from the West Coast. Our brother, Carey Newman, who you will meet, his daughter, Addie, and his wife, Elaine. So we welcome you into this beautiful homeland of our relatives, the Algonquin people. Nichkibeidug, miigwej kibijaye goma nongum, bijaje goma nishnabe ki umama weneniwag. Bienvenue à tous.
Bienvenue ici. Bienvenue à la territoire non cédé et puissance de la nation algonquine. Always honored and always proud to represent
The ancestors that I come from, to represent the community born and raised from, and always to be in the presence of community members, relatives. As I acknowledge the ancestors, the Algonquin ancestors, I acknowledge the ancestors of all Indigenous peoples from coast to coast. And I also acknowledge everyone's ancestors, all of you, no matter where you come from. We must never forget our ancestors. It is said in our ways of knowing and doing and being, in our teachings and our responsibility, that our ancestors are always with us. Our ancestors continue to pray for us. Our ancestors continue to guide us. Tonight we gather for the exhibit of the witness blanket, and you will hear and learn more of this. We pay honor to Indian residential school survivors through this beautiful, magnificent, spiritual creation of Carey Newman, the witness blanket. The survivors who did not make it home, the survivors who are now in that spirit world, the survivors who continue to be here, and all our communities, all our communities. We come together with one mind, one heart, one spirit, and one voice to say, Chimigwej, Gishiminado, Kichimigwej onje, Kinakego, Chimigwej, Gishiminado onje, Ikwewag, Ashishininiwag, Migwej, Gishiminado onje, Nishimesh, Carey Newman, Ashish, Addie, Ashish Elaine. Nibuksendam, Gishiminado, Nibuksendam, Mashkawi wizin, Nibakawin, Minapomadzwin, Ashish Kichimigwej onje, Kizagi Edwin Gishiminado. Migwej, Kokamasag Mishomsag, Migwej, Kibijayeg Homa, Nogum Migwej onje, Kiwitu Koa Dodwin. Creator, together as one people, with that one heart and that one mind, that one spirit and that one voice, we thank you, Creator, for bringing all of us here together. We thank you, Creator, for protecting our prayers, for protecting these words that are being shared. We thank you, Creator, for our relative Carey Newman, our relative Addie, and our relative Elaine, and their communities. We thank you, Creator, for our ancestors who continue to watch over us and to pray for us. We thank you, Creator, for our relatives who are in that spirit world. We thank them for their love and their prayer. We thank you, Creator, for the grandmothers and the grandfathers who are with us at this time, for their strength, for their help. Creator, thank you for blessing us with life and all of the beauty of Mother Earth and all of the beauty of our grandmother, the moon, and our grandfather, the sun. And we thank you, Creator, for the love that you bless us, each of us. And may we together, as brothers and sisters, no matter where we come from, that we walk that good road, bimose mamawe, with love, with kindness and respect for one another. And Creator, I also say these words of thank you. I thank the Museum of History for doing this good work in promoting, validating, and celebrating Indigenous artists, and for providing that good space for our stories to be shared, for our experiences and realities to be learned. Creator, we thank you for each and every person who was instrumental in putting this exhibit together. And may you continue to bless them, Creator, so that the good work of education, the good work of reconciliation, and the good work of healing continues today and tomorrow for all our children. Kichimigwaj, migwaj. Kizagian, Newichkiwedug, Kizagian. To each and every one of you, I know you will enjoy this event. Take good care. No words for goodbye except that I say God bless to each and every one of you, and I love you. Miigwech, thank you.
Thank you so much, Elder Commanda, for your warm welcome and for grounding tonight's event in the spirits of reflection and respect. La couverture des témoins, une réplique grandeur nature de l'installation de l'artiste Carey Newman, est plus qu'une œuvre d'art. Elle nous invite à réfléchir aux effets du système des pensionnats, à ses répercussions actuelles et à notre rôle collectif dans le processus de vérité et de réconciliation. C'est un puissant appel à l'action et à notre devoir de mémoire. Created by master carver Carey Newman, the witness blanket honors the resilience of Indian residential school survivors. Each item in the installation carries an individual story, and together they weave a compelling narrative of loss, of strength, reconciliation, and pride. Accueillir cette exposition reflète notre engagement en tant qu'institution muséale nationale à amplifier les voix autochtones, à confronter le passé douloureux du Canada et à favoriser la compréhension de notre histoire. Il s'agit d'un élément essentiel du rôle que nous devons jouer dans la transmission de la mémoire et la promotion de la réconciliation. Grâce à des expositions comme celle-ci, nous nous efforçons de créer des espaces où les personnes survivantes peuvent partager leur vérité et où le dialogue et la guérison peuvent avoir lieu. Here at the museum, the exhibition is complemented by a special school program for grades 7 to 12, and I really encourage you to tell all the educators and teachers in your lives. We also will have Cine Plus screenings of the film Picking Up the Pieces, the making of the witness blanket, and we invite you to visit our website for more information. I would now like to invite Adelyn Newman Ting to the stage to share her thoughts.
Hi, my name is Adelyn Newman Ting. My traditional name is Kesugilakw, meaning leader born to be. Through my father, I'm Kwakwakiwak from the Kukukan, Gigsam, and Wawallaby clans of Fort Rupert, and Coast Salish from the Cham of the Stolo Nation along the Upper Fraser Valley in what is now British Columbia, as well as English, Irish, and Scottish settler. Through my mother, I'm Chinese from Taiwan, and my name is Ding Li Wen. Art as a catalyst for change. Change is a big word. People are comfortable with what they know. So when change is about the environmental or social issues, people are afraid it means giving up their comfort. As youth, things change every day. Crushes, friends, annoyance level at your parents as you grow. Times at various sports, for me, my 2,000-meter erg time in rowing, and the number of speed steps I can do in 30 seconds in competitive jump rope. Yes, that's a sport. So, even though many youth don't think about making change as something that we can do, we are probably the best people to do it. We are young and not afraid of change. Not all adults think about how their decisions affect our generation, so I think it is important for us to make our voices heard. My father makes a lot of art for change, some of which he'll speak about today. But before he takes the stage, I'm going to tell you what some of his artwork means to me. The first work I'll touch on today is the witness blanket, which was inspired by my umbo and I. One, a residential school survivor, and one that is the next generation. The witness blanket is made of pieces collected from residential schools, government buildings, and churches across Canada. It honors survivors, bearing witness to make sure the mistakes of the past don't happen again in the future. Over the years, I've taken on more and more responsibility for the witness blanket. I grew up in the home where all the pieces were gathered and the panels put together. It even included some of my own splattery mixed little paintings from when I was 3 or 4 years old. The final addition to it was my handprints on the inside of the door. Last September, I agreed to be the future blanket keeper. Some people leave their children's family heirlooms like jewelry. Mine is leaving me a 40-foot blanket that has 887 pieces of history. Gee, thanks, Dad. Jewelry would have been great and certainly a lot less high maintenance. When my dad asked me if I would take on this responsibility, it took me some time to think about it. My parents believe that leaders are not born, they are raised. I grew up knowing this, and even from a young age, I've gone to big events and participated in different things in different ways. It is a lot of responsibility, and it can be even harder knowing that I'm part of my dad's inspiration, but I hope that I can live up to it. The work that he does is important, not just for adults out there, but for my generation too. In fact, it might be even more important for my generation, because everything adults have done until now, bad or good, is making the future that we will inherit. And since we are the ones who have to live here, I want to help make it a better world than it is now. That is why I agreed to eventually take over caring for the witness blanket. My generation has responsibilities, and we need to do what we can not to repeat the mistakes of the past. The witness blanket is my dad's biggest project to date, and is a defining point in his career. He started this massive undertaking the year I was born, and finished it when I was 4 years old. The fact that it is still on tour, and that it still matters after all this time, shows me exactly what I came here to talk about. Art is a catalyst for positive change. One of my favorites, and one I had the biggest role in helping to make, is the Oakland's totem, which was carved with the youth and community of my elementary school through my grade 3, 4, and 5 years. I remember in 3rd grade going with 3 of my friends to help pick the log. Little known fact is that we chose based on the scent. This one smells like lollipops, and this one smells like cotton candy. This totem was a big part of my senior years of elementary school, making designs in class, using carving tools to help chip off the wood, going to the courtyard where my dad was working on the pole, sometimes with my class and sometimes during breaks, and just having culture weave its way through my classroom in different ways. We learned all the things you would assume we learned, but we also learned math and science with Indigenous knowledge and worldviews in mind. Possibly my favorite part of this project was the handprints. All the staff and students from the 2020 and 2021 school year had their handprints carved into the panels that stand behind the totem. We got to choose what color we wanted our hands to be, and now the panels are filled with a rainbow of handprints in all shapes and sizes. I personally think that this poll really redefined the way that youth, at least for our school, think about the meaning of art and reconciliation. As you have seen, I've grown up surrounded by art that is meant to make people think. I've sat in the backseat of the car with a Model Totem 2.0 strapped right into the seat next to me, like the sibling I never wanted. My dad will tell you more about that. To my handprints on all major works my dad has created since I was born. The last project will even outlive me. The seedling. My dad is designing a totem in digital 3D, planting a seedling, and in partnership with the University of Victoria, promising to make the tree into a totem in 600 years when the tree is fully grown. My dad thinks that unlike some of his other projects, this one isn't a reaction to colonialism, but he is planting a tree because old-growth forests have been destroyed by industrial and capitalism, which were brought here by colonialism. So we will have to disagree, or we'll have to agree to disagree. These projects are massive undertakings with whole teams of people behind them, but all of them begin as nothing more than an idea. And I think that youth can come up with these powerful ideas too, and youth can definitely take part in these sorts of projects. In fact, helping with projects like these is a great way to get inspired. That is why I accept invitations like the one that brought me here to talk to you today, even when there are other things I'd rather be doing. Let's be honest, I'm 14. What I really want to do is hang out with my friends, play Block Blast on my phone, practice rowing with my crew, and jump rope with my teammates. But I accept this responsibility because I want everyone, including kids, to create more art that will help make a better future. Because after our parents and grandparents are gone, the future we are making right now will be ours to live in. I pay attention to the news and to politics. I have enough understanding of the world to know that some situations right now are harming our future. One example is how Donald Trump is deporting people who he doesn't consider Americans, including the Dreamers, youth born in the United States. Another is when politicians ignore or deny climate change. So even though my parents sometimes have to remind me to write my speeches, I'm here because I see it as my responsibility to help make a good future for myself and others, and overall, to do things with purpose and intent. With that, I will pass you over to my father.
As much as I love coming and listening to my daughter speak, I also have to be the one who steps onto stage after her. Thank you, Adelyn. Yo, nugo am Carey Newman. Heyman bakam tla'i hiles kingumeng. I come from the Quebec, Gatineau, and Wallaby clans of the Kwakwaka'wakw Nation, which is on the northern end of what we currently call Vancouver Island, as well as from Shiam of the Stolo Sol Tomoch along the upper Fraser Valley in British Columbia. On my mother's side, I'm English, Irish, Scottish settler from Saskatchewan. And I think it's important not just to locate myself like that, but from a cultural perspective, that kind of introduction ties me to my people. It holds me responsible to them, and it calls them into this space. Before I go further, I want to thank Elder Commanda for welcoming me and my family here. Also, for the beautiful prayer and medicine that you offered to the blanket upstairs. Is that better? Okay. And I also want to thank the team at the museum who has done such an incredible job of inviting us here, of bringing the blanket here, of making this exhibit happen. Gila. It means a lot to me. Oh, you know what? I forgot one thing. I need to introduce you to my ancestor, Nulis. This mask tells the story of my family. Before we were registered by the Indian agent, our name was Nulis. So Newman is sort of the anglicization of one of our traditional names. Now, this mask is on display at the Museum of Ethnology in Berlin, and I've had the chance to go and visit it. And I thought it was appropriate for me to start this talk with transformation, art as a catalyst for change, and show you that way, way, way back in the 1800s, my people were already using art in this way. So you see it here closed, And then you see it here open. That's the same mask. And it speaks to our family's commitment to living transformatively, to living on behalf of our people. And I thought, how better to start an artist talk than with an ancestor to introduce. My culture and my family have made me into the person and artist that I am today. My father, Victor Himasaka, who is the man in the middle, he's an artist, a residential school survivor, and he taught me to carve. Beside him in the white and blue tunic is my Uncle Edwin, Chief Nulis, who sadly we lost not too many years ago. But I carry with me so many teachings that he shared, both around our culture and around what it looks like to be a leader in our ways. I also thought, seeing as you've seen Addie as a 14-year-old, you might want to see her as about a month old. That is her at her first potlatch. And I wanted to show her because, you know, I learned about my culture from my dad and my uncle and my aunts, my family. But when we had Addie, she taught me how to think about my impacts and my influence on the future in a much, much more tangible way. And I couldn't talk about my family without mentioning my wife, who is my best friend. And she really did teach me how to enact the values that I was learning from my family over the years. When we first met, she would say, "Oh, why don't you go and do this? Why don't you go and do that?" And this isn't going to make me look very good, but I used to say out loud, "I don't give time, I give money." Which, when I hear myself say it now, I think, man, what a jerk. But Elaine talked about the difference between giving time and giving money. And it really did change me as a person and changed me as an artist too. So I have always been an artist. Very young, I started learning to design, started learning to carve. You'd think that I would have carved something like a rattle or a bowl, but no, I carved a car. And I got my first cut at age 5. If anybody wants to see the scar, I can show you later. Addie has also always been an artist. She hasn't used that easel for a long time, but it's still downstairs near my jewelry station. And as you have seen, she is already a model of determination and inspiration for me and for others. And proud dad plug here, later this year she's going to be competing for Team Canada at the World Jump Rope Championships in Japan. But art has also shaped me along the way. From prints and drawings to jewelry, I spent my time throughout my teens and my early 20s working on all of these things, learning from the process, and slowly perfecting or developing my technical skills. I then started to translate them into wood carvings, to masks, sometimes traditional like the previous one, and sometimes a little bit more contemporary. And eventually into metal and stone sculptures. I'm speeding through this because I don't have as much time as I'm accustomed to standing in front of my class, where I just have everybody and they can't leave until I dismiss them. So I would say I spent almost 20 years developing my technical skills. And eventually, I started to carve totems. And the bigger the totems got, the more help I needed both to make them, but also to raise them. And I think that this totem that we're looking right now, which was raised in front of a place called the Sauk Harbor House in my hometown, is the first time that I really started to see what it means to work with community. And it was that raising, everybody coming together to pull that totem up, that started to tweak my ideas around process, around what more a totem might stand for, what more artwork can mean. And from there, I started to get a little bit into public work. And the biggest change, I think, came, or the first big change maybe came, during the Spirit Pole tour, which is a project where I carved a totem with people from towns all over British Columbia for the Cowichan 2008 North American Indigenous Games. And by that time, I was beginning to understand the transformative power of the artistic process on myself as an individual, but that experience taught me that by involving community in the process, we didn't just change the look of the work, we changed how people felt about it. We changed what it means. And that experience was pivotal in preparing me for the work that I would go on to do in my career. And although I have made quite a bit of public art over the years, working in different mediums, taking some of the things from the jewelry and turning them into big metal sculptures, taking some of the things from the wood carving practice and turning them into giant earth drums. The things that I've made with community are the ones where I found my purpose. And before I talk about the witness blanket and share a couple of other projects in the context of being art, at being a catalyst for change, I want to share some of the specific Kwakwaka'wakw principles or teachings that continue to shape my work. The first concept is about accepting and honoring responsibility to the past, present, and future. It's a way of understanding reciprocity across generations. And it isn't so much taught as demonstrated in the words and actions of my hereditary leaders. Awitnikyola. It means to live in respectful relationship with the land, air, water, spirit worlds, and everything in them. And what I take from that is a worldview that places humans within rather than above the cycle of life. The third principle is that of Mayakala, which calls for us to work and speak together in ways that embody respect for the land, for the self, and for each other. And given the way that political discourse has begun to become polarized, I can't think of a more important principle for right now. So all of those teachings and all of those people and all of that work prepared me for making the witness blanket. And more than any other project, this one changed me as a person and as an artist. It showed me how art can initiate change on multiple levels: individual, communal, and structural. On an individual level, each project related to the witness blanket has come from someone who spent time with the work itself and found a connection to one of the pieces on the blanket, maybe through their own memories or through their own experiences. And once they've made that connection to the object or to the stories on the blanket, they were inspired to do something. And they brought me various projects, like a couple of books that I've written. And I worked on all of these. I work with at least one collaborator and often many. the publisher had come to see the witness blanket, and at the end of the opening came and said, "Have you ever thought of writing a book about this?" And I said, "Well, it feels like something I would do, near the end of my career." And she said, "But think about what it could mean for education, what it could mean for children." And so that's why there's two versions. There's one for like a coffee table book for everybody, and one that's more directed towards young adults. A website to share more of the stories behind the objects on the blanket that was made in collaboration with the Canadian Museum for Human Rights, with support from a partnership with TELUS, with a couple of companies in Victoria, and teachers from across the country who helped to figure out which stories we wanted to tell and how to organize them in such a way that they started out at a level that's good for younger children, and then slowly increased in the depth and in the seriousness of the stories. We also have 2 traveling exhibitions that are the same size as the witness blanket, and including the one that we're going to be looking at here at the opening today. The next project coming out from that is a virtual reality project. And this one is one that I really like. It's pretty exciting. But I wanted to figure out a way to make it so that it wasn't like a game. I was a little bit worried about such a serious and heavy topic becoming gamified. And so I worked with a colleague at the University of Victoria, and we've been gathering sounds of culture, sounds of the languages that were under attack from residential schools. And the photo that you're looking at there, that's my dad, and that's on the far right, that's him. The first thing he did when he decided that he was going to finally put on the goggles was to go and pick up the photograph of himself that's on the blanket. And it was the last Christmas that he spent at home before he went to residential school. Each of these projects expanded the community of care around the blanket. They fostered collaboration, they forged new relationships, and eventually began to change the consciousness of the people and institutions that they run. These projects are a testament to the way that art can change the way a community thinks and works together. It changed my relationship with material and how I think about ownership. So instead of seeing the objects that are on there as raw material, like a log or like a piece of silver that I shape into a bracelet, through the stories and truth that they hold, I began to think of them as having agency or life of their own. So after the original Witness Blanket tour, where the blanket was touring around for about 4.5 years, it became apparent that we were going to have to bring the tour to a close because of the wear and tear that the travel was putting onto it. And so we started to look for a permanent home. And one of the stops along the way had been the Canadian Museum for Human Rights. And so we reached out to them and asked if they were interested in having the witness blanket as part of their collection. But I had a caveat. That I couldn't sell them the blanket, that we couldn't do like a standard kind of acquisition format. And so we had to come up with a different kind of acquisition process or legal agreement. And that's how I began to work on the stewardship agreement. And the word that we built into that agreement from Kwakwala is aaksila, which means to care for someone or something. And one of the principles that we built into it was that rather than us, me and the museum, negotiating rights like copyrights and moral rights, and we decided that we would place all rights associated with the agreement on the blanket and the stories that it carries. And instead, we negotiated responsibility. The interesting thing about rights versus responsibility is when rights overlap they start to form a hierarchy. But when responsibilities overlap, they interconnect. And if you have a strong relationship, then you're working together towards a common goal. So this stewardship agreement is based in both Kwakwaka'wakw and Western law. And it's the first known example of a crown corporation acquiring something for their collection in this way. And we've built into it responsibility to maintain our relationship over time. We made the agreement a little over 5 years ago. And last September, Addie and I went to the Canadian Museum for Human Rights with some of the people who were part of that first ceremony. And that's where she accepted the invitation to become the future keeper of the blanket. And so she stood with me through the day, and she held space. And we called new witnesses from the territory where the witness blanket now lives, and further expanded that community of care. And through changes in people, it continues to connect us. And so when we were there, Aisha Khan, who's the CEO of the museum now, talked about reading the agreement and kind of puzzling over it for a little while, and then realizing that it was about the text messages that we send each other, the little things that we do to maintain our friendship that inform the witness blanket's inform the way that we go about caring for the witness blanket. And so I think about the stewardship agreement as an example of how art can lead structural change. So I have seen through this one project individuals, communities, and structures change. Now, I'm going to talk about the Oakland's totem. Addie described this project better than I could, but I did want to say that the change that comes from this project, I think, is a little bit different than some of my other projects. Seeing the kids take ownership of the process, I think this is where they were pointing to the one that smelled like lollipops. Seeing them participate in picking the animals that were going to go onto the totem, using the tools, getting excited about something cultural, and not just excited about it, but understanding how the things they were learning in school relate to a traditional culture. That's something that Elaine told me when we first met. I was carving that Sioux Carb House totem, and she said, she's a teacher, school teacher, and she said, one day, I'm going to get you to carve a totem in a school. And I said, oh, I don't think that's going to happen. And she just bided her time until Addie was born. And then when Addie started to go to Oakland, she said, hey, remember when I told you that I wanted you to do a totem at a school? Well, how do you feel about that now? And obviously, as a parent, I had changed my mind considerably. So I think that the power of this project, or the biggest power from this project, is still to come. Because when I imagine what kind of leadership these young people will be capable of when they're the leaders of the future, and think about the relationship that they have and understanding that they have with Indigenous culture, that's where I get my hope, right? That's why I do these kinds of projects, and that's why this one in particular was so important to me. Now, Addie talked a little bit about Totem 2.0. And it's a project that I came up with when I was working on this pole there, which is the largest pole I had created in my career. The person who commissioned it said, I would really like to see the tree standing in the forest before it's cut down, and maybe I would like to watch it be cut down. And it's something that I had never actually done before, because every time I'd gotten a log, I'd gone to a log sort, like you saw in the picture for the Oakland totem, and we just sort of walked along like a graveyard of cedar trees and said, this one seems like the right one. So it was a really interesting process to be able to go and pick a tree that was still standing in a forest. But it was also a really visceral experience to see it cut down and feel it when a couple of 100-foot tree falls on the ground nearby and shakes your world, literally. So that was stuck in my mind as I was working, and projects like this take a few years. And so over the course of the project, I began to think, like, is this the right thing to be doing? Should I be carving old growth when I know how difficult it is to find it, when I know how scarce it's becoming? And so it caused me to reconsider at least making totems for the commercial market in that way. What I came to as a decision was that this would be my last totem that I would sell to a private client, made from old growth, and that all totems in the future would be either made from salvaged wood or I would have to find a different way to make them. And that was the impetus for Totem 2.0. And so I worked with Camosun Innovates. I had this idea where I could take second growth trees, and if I cut the beams just right, so they're tapered and compound tapered, that I could fit them together into a shape that's the same size as a full old growth pole, but made from second growth, therefore more sustainable. I also come up with a few other ideas that I'll unveil in future years after I finish this one. But the idea was for me to think about how I could make totems that were still made from cedar, that were still the same size, but that I wasn't contributing to the harm that I was hoping to ask for change around. Because the argument against stopping cutting old growth is, well, the economy. And I thought, well, if we could come up with a different way of making a totem, and we've been doing this for thousands and thousands of years, then policymakers and industry could follow. This past August, we finally had everything together. We had all the beams cut, and we started to assemble it. And you can see Teus there helping to fit it together. We started carving it pretty soon after. And we're kind of still in the process. I'm planning to have this project finished this coming spring. But I also wanted to share one more picture of my dad and say that my favorite moment of this project so far was when I invited him to come to see the Totem 2.0. And I said, Dad, you're gonna love this. And at the end of that log, there's a little crank, and I could reach down and I can turn the pole 360 degrees, so I can always be working right at the perfect height. And if you've ever had to like crawl under a car to change your brakes, or like, we call it totem yoga, because we would always be crawling under or climbing over a log. And now we just rotate it to the right height. And when my dad saw that, he went, ooh, like he was excited. Not quite excited enough to come help me work on it, but he does like to come and visit. The last project that I want to share with you is the seedling. And as Addie described, it is about thinking into the future. It was me realizing that things like the witness blanket and Totem 2.0 were really reactions to colonial harm. And therefore, they were influenced by colonialism. And I set a challenge for myself to try to think of a project that could be free from colonial influence. And so although Addie and I do disagree a little bit, she actually sent me a text message while I was on stage describing this from the audience, the first time she... Anyways, the idea is pretty simple. Plant a seedling, design a totem in digital 3D, and together with University of Victoria, making a commitment to carve and raise the pole when the tree is full grown. The thing about this project is that the power isn't necessarily in the process of making the pole, it's more in the idea. Because if we change our relationship with land, then we can make this happen. If we change our relationship with technology, then we can make this happen. And if we change our relationship with time, then we can make this happen. And I'll explain a little bit, because currently our relationship with land is one of dominion, where we think of it as property that we can own and trade. And even when it comes to parks, even when it comes to land trusts, all of these things can be broken. And there's the risk that if we planted a seedling somewhere and we promised not to cut it down, that, you know, the next generation or the next president of the university would just say, I don't really understand this, we're gonna move on from it. So part of this is coming up with a new legal definition for land based on the principles of a Wheatnik Yola. Think about how many times we have to update our technology, our phones. Think about anybody who's got like videos from 15 or 20 years ago. I have students who work with digital videos from their childhood, and they have to write codecs to be able to see the video, because technology is moving at such a rate that not only the hardware, but the software becomes obsolete. And I think that's largely driven by the need to continue to sell. So I want this project, for one small part of it, to be about changing a relationship with technology and storing that digital file in a way that will be available in 600 years. Lastly, our relationship with time. Everything operates on 1-year fiscal cycles or 4-year political cycles. But how do we change the harm that's occurred over hundreds of years if we only have 4 years to see results? We have to think generationally to be able to bring about the kind of change that would see old growth forests reestablished along the West Coast. And I think of that as part of my responsibility to the future generations. So, transformative change through a Wheatnik Yola. In planting these seeds in law, in governance, in economies, we can water them, we can foster them, we can help them grow to bring about change. So I think of this project not as important for the answers it holds, but for the questions that it asks. Rethinking perspective. Mayakala as governance. The answer to the questions that this project raises are found in cultural perspectives. They're found across disciplines, technological, legal, governance. They bring together combinations of people, knowledge systems, and ideas towards a common goal, building relationships between and multiplying the sum of these individual parts. So this project is my attempt to create something that does all of these things in the hope that one day, by the time the pole is carved, are you listening, Addie? By the time the pole is carved, that we are no longer governed by colonial influence. That's the hope. And across a matrix of change that extends beyond this project, each act, each idea, regardless of scale, is important. And it is a contribution to change. So, especially now when the weight of things like climate change and geopolitics feel existential, I think of art as a catalyst for change. Art can be resistance. It can be truth. And at its best, rather than telling people what to think or how to feel, art acts as an invitation for people to question and reconsider. And that is where change, first of the individual, then of the collective, and eventually of structures that lead to the challenges in the first place. So Gatineau, thank you all for coming here. Thank you, Addie, for your wisdom and for always challenging me to think more. Always challenging me to consider what my actions mean for you. Gilakasla Haitsepka. Thank you. Hemas.
I think we have time for questions. If you have a couple of microphones in the audience, for Adi or for Carey.
Well, thank you very much. I'm still blown away by all that. I have a question about the agreement with the Museum of Human Rights and the witness blanket. I understand somewhat about it involves responsibilities, but just to help me understand better, could you give an example of a clause or two from that about these responsibilities and who has them and how they're carried out?
I can try. It doesn't really look like a lot of the contracts that I encounter when it comes to acquisitions. Instead, it talks a lot about relationship. It works a lot around defining our relationships with each other and our relationship to the work, and then speaks about the responsibility and how we come to how we determine those clauses. So we also speak of it as a living document. And I think that the power in that is that by not locking it into a very regimented definition of who has to do what, and instead saying that we share the responsibility to act in the best interest of the blanket, which is one of the phrases from the written agreement, that becomes an ongoing conversation. If you're interested to read the agreement itself, it's available on the Witness Blanket website, which is witnessblanket.ca. You can read through it and see, I mean, we have schedules, we identify that kind of past, honoring the past, respecting the present, taking responsibility for the future. And it has things like calling for us to feast the blanket or to eat together at least every 4 years. So those are the kinds of things that are in there, instead of it being, you do this, I do this, you do that. It's more about what are the needs of the blanket, and then how do we do it. So you might even think of it as closer to co-parenting than a typical contract.
Thank you so much for that talk. I think, speaking on all of our behalfs, it was really amazing to see both Addie and you speak. And I just had a question about the different versions of the witness blankets that you talked about, like the books and the different traveling exhibits, and deciding to keep it in Winnipeg. And I was just wondering what that experience was like for both of you, seeing the blanket kind of go from each variation, and how its story and impacts kind of changed depending on which version people were seeing.
Thank you. It's been really interesting. One of the things that is a benefit of people bringing you ideas is you get to learn new things. I'm learning about what's possible inside the world of virtual reality. I had to learn how to take the thoughts that are in my head and put them into Word form on a page. And luckily I had an incredible co-author in Kirsty Hudson, who used to be a journalist. And the way that we would work together would be to sit at my kitchen counter and we would have a conversation, and she would sort of do that pre-interview that producers do, where she would ask questions and then she would compile them into a form. And with that, with the documentary film, with the digital witness blanket, like the website, every time I get a little bit of a different feeling, and every time I know that we're creating something that is going to reach a little bit of a different audience. And so I'm a little bit, I don't know what the right word for it is, but I guess I'm a little bit taken aback by the different offers that have come forward and the different possibilities that exist. And I feel incredibly privileged to be able to see the witness blanket and the stories that it carries translated into so many different mediums. So I don't know if that totally answers your question, but I really do love the process. And if you asked me before I started this project, if I could envision myself sitting where I am right now, talking about all of these different projects, I would have thought you were crazy, because I thought that I was going to be making a work like many others that I've made, where I finish it, I put it up, and then I go on to the next project. But we're now 10 years, almost 11 years since we finished making the witness blanket. And I feel as strong a responsibility to care for it as I did when we were first starting.
Hi, my name is Sylvia. I'm a retired teacher from here. And I want to say how much of an honor it is to actually meet you, Carey, because I've known about this work for a long time, and your daughter. And as a retired teacher, I have a question for you, Adi. I have worked with youth and young people who have been very instrumental in making their voices heard, especially around issues of justice or injustice. And I was just wondering if you had ever considered, maybe on your dad's website or something, being available for young people to talk to ask questions of. Because with the honoring that your dad has just done for you tonight, you are up there. So, what do you think?
I've never really ever thought about that before. I've been always really busy with the rest of my life, because I know that this is what my dad does for a living. But, you know, I do school and sports. But I think that's a good idea, and I'll take that into consideration. I've been thinking about running workshops. I jump rope competitively, and I have for 6 years now. And I've been thinking about running workshops for Indigenous kids and taking them maybe into Indigenous communities.
Thank you very much. And if there's ever a time when some of us who are interested in that with the young people that we work with, letting us know so that we can reach you or have a way to get in touch.
We'll make sure to do that.
So this will conclude this part of the evening. So I would like to extend, I think on behalf of all of us, our deepest thanks to Carey and for sharing his vision, for extending his community of care to our museum and entrusting us with this replica of the blanket. It's truly an honor to be able to show it to our visitors and to share its story. Adelyn, thank you so much for your powerful voice and advocacy. You're a force to reckon with. I don't think it's the last time we'll hear from you. So I would like also to thank our partners and colleagues at the Canadian Museum for Human Rights for making this exhibition possible. And thanks everyone who brought this exhibition, our teams here, and this event to life. Merci d'avoir assisté à cette importante soirée.
Thank you.
Elaine, Carey, Elaine. I encourage you to join us for a small reception at the end of the hall in the Agdegwai Salon, and take time to explore the Witness Blanket exhibition, which is upstairs, where Carey's work continues to inspire reflection, healing, and dialogue. Profitez bien du reste de votre soirée. For coming.